Welcome to the Anti-Architect Podcast. I am your host, Christian Giordano. As president and owner of the design firm Mancini Duffy, I am driven by a quest for learning and radically changing the industry. With this podcast, I'm hoping to improve the industry that I'm so passionate about by taking a critical look at how architects work through a variety of voices and shared experiences. Brian, thank you so much for taking the time to be my guest on the Anti-Architect Podcast.
Thanks for the invite. I mean, you've had a cavalcade of really interesting, fascinating people on it, so I feel like honored to be in that mix.
No way, no, I've been looking forward to having you on. So like I said in the introduction, you and I probably met, if I think about it and do my bad math, it's probably 26, 27 years ago, back in the 90s, so we can feel kind of old, you know?
Yeah, back then.
But what I think is funny is that you and I never really met on a professional level. It was more social through our friend Darren Reynolds. And we really didn't cross paths until you became essentially our client at Convene, which really was not that long. It was probably like 5 years ago.
Yeah,
maybe.
about that.
And I remember I was very nervous to have you as my client because I was always told that you were an extremely, extremely talented designer, like one of the best in New York City, especially when it came to workplace, but that you were difficult to work with.
Yeah, I'm still trying to shake that one, but yeah, I guess that.
And I guess what I discovered, obviously, is that you're incredibly smart. You know, you look at things a bit differently. You have extremely high standards and very, very detail oriented. And you're kind of like your maniac reputation was really because you're looking for severe design and, total design excellence, like in everything that you do. And so I very much appreciate that, obviously. And it was great to have you as a client and to actually get to know you a bit. So I guess my first question is, where does the intensity come from and how has it shaped your approach in leading your projects and your teams?
Yeah, the intensity is, as you pointed out, it's a fight for quality. It is a search for excellence. It's a unwillingness to accept something that isn't as good as it could be, and that constant desire and search for, is there a better solution in here? And, I guess part of it is not suffering the idea that there could be a better solution that hasn't been explored because people didn't get to it, didn't want to do the work, didn't want to put the effort in, or just weren't thinking as hard. So I've built a reputation, I wouldn't say for difficulty necessarily, although others might, for challenging people, for pushing hard, for digging deep. And all of that comes from not just design for design's sake, but design as a solution to the client's issues, concerns, aspirations, goals, and really trying to make sure that we're honoring what we're trying to do and not just give them the same solution that everyone else had.
Yeah.
To try to break a bit from that sea of sameness that can, especially in the corporate interiors world, can quickly become the status quo.
Without a doubt. I mean, I won't say it, but I was just at a very large headquarters project, brand spanking new in the city. And it looked just like the last, brand new spanking, beautiful, corporate design. And a lot of it's done by the same company. Mm-hmm. And I always give them credit, Gensler, obviously. I give them credit for what they've achieved and what the scale is. But there definitely is a lot of the same design.
It can be formulaic sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's sort of the easy solution is we know what it is. Sometimes I think that some of it comes from, I call it the curse of Pinterest too, which is, you sort of go into what was most recently published, find an image that you like, put it on a mood board, point to it, client says, oh, I like that. You're like, cool, that's what we're doing. Mm-hmm. And you get to a solution way too quickly based on an image instead of really giving it the rigorous thought.
Yeah.
And developing, is this really the right solution for this outcome? But also, that's an easier outcome for a client and an easier outcome for human beings. I mean, as human beings, we all want to naturally be the second person to do something for the very first time.
Yeah,
right.
That's true.
And innovation is hard. Innovation and doing something differently than what you've seen before is hard to convince people of. And so it takes more work. It takes more energy, and you have to push for it because you're not going to get it from everybody out of the box. And I suspect that my passion came from that. And to be fair, the reason that the passion has come through and that intensity has come out is because I've been really super, super fortunate in my career to have some of the most fantastic clients and projects, and to be able to see the possibilities and success, and to sort of get through the sort of naysayers, and maybe the word nonsense wouldn't be right there, but that may be where the reputation comes from. But the sort of nonsense of people saying, well, there should definitely be some wood in this project. And I'm like, well, why? Like, why should there be wood in this project? I'm like, well, because it should be warmer. I'm like, but is that what this project's all about? And you have to sort of push through it. And why do you, and you really get down to it, someone says, well, I feel like I'd like it more if there was wood in it.
Yeah.
I'm like, there it is. It's your personal impressions and likes and wants and coming through, not necessarily the solution to the problem.
So how do you balance that then? How do you balance when a client, even a high profile client, comes and says, this is what I like, this is what I want, but you don't quite see it that way in terms of the right design solution?
I sort of figured this out many years ago, working with a very high profile client who's, I will decline to say their name, but a very influential person in New York City, a great client of mine, of ours for years. And he was asking us to do things that I didn't think was right. And the first thing I realized was, I need to show this guy, exactly what he asked for. Mm. And so the first solution was presented was exactly what was asked for. Right? Let it sink, let him absorb it, and then say, on the other hand, there's another way to think about this that we think could be more interesting, and outline an alternative vision. And then that moment of listening to your client and being incredibly responsive to exactly what they asked for, whether you agree with it or not, first, gives you the credibility. It gives you the trust. They know now that you're not ignoring them and doing what you want. But then showing them a different opinion means that you've not only listened to them, you have the chutzpah to challenge them. Yeah. To say, okay, good solution, totally works. I understand why you'd ask for it. However, there may be a better way and something to consider. And you look at that better way and say, is this going to be the right thing? And I think the time we did that, the client looked at us and said, so you're telling me I should tear this building down and rebuild it? And we're like, well, yeah. Wow. And he said, why didn't you just say that to begin with? We're like, well, because it would not have gone this way.
Yeah. So do you come prepared with sort of, let's say that what they're looking for, and then, the next couple of iterations are the potential of what it could be if it evolved from that kind of thing? Or do you let that sink in and say, we'll be back in a week? Like, what is your process? No,
I think it's, in our experience, it's better to bring the options to the table sooner. But in that respectful way of always acknowledging exactly what was requested before you share the alternatives.
And that is our job, right? Our job is they hired us for a reason, right? And because we don't know everything, we don't have all the answers, but we do know design, and we do know a lot of times the right solutions, or we've gone down this road and, hey, this didn't work out this way. So maybe, based on all of these years of experience and the past projects we've done, maybe there are some alternatives here that we could kind of throw out and you might learn from them.
Yeah, I like to call it listening, then leading. I guess it's kind of like Volkswagen sign, then drive, but, so a riff on a theme. But listening, then leading is really absorb what they're asking for and what their goals and aspirations are, and then showing them how to get there. Showing the team, the consultants, your collaborators, and making the decision-making process as easy as humanly possible for your client.
Yeah.
Because outside of developers who, develop and build buildings for a living, and that's really their profession, almost every other client we have, ultimately, the organization doesn't do this for a living.
Correct.
They run a business doing something, selling a widget, selling a service,
Yep.
and we're there to help them do this thing that they need to do for their business to be successful. We're a cost center, not a profit center. But they want to elevate the game, theoretically. They've brought you in as the expert. And our goal is to help them answer questions and make it easy.
Yeah.
And I remember collaborating. I had this great opportunity on a big new building project for an owner-occupier in, of all places, India, years and years ago. And I was working with a capital A architect, not a Cape architect, but like a really solid major tower building design firm and their senior leadership. And we came in to present to the client. It was a meeting here in New York. And we go to the architect's office. And they'd been presenting all morning. And we were coming in to take the later PM shift for the interiors. So they're doing the building. We're doing the interiors. And we catch the tail end of their presentation. We walk into a room this size. And the walls and floors are covered with 24 stone samples, 20-something glass samples, a bunch of metal samples, a bunch of wood samples. Some of them are light, some of them are dark. It's like a library of finishes. And we walk in just in time for the client to present, or the architect to present to the client and say, we're trying to select the material for the spandrels of this giant atrium that really is the defining characteristic of this building. And, at some point, we're going to come back in later and talk about the interior, the atrium, and the finishes. And they said, well, the spandrels could be stone, they could be light stone, they could be dark stone, they could be medium stone, they could be something that's a lot more figured or something that's pretty dull. It could be wood, it could be a light wood or a dark wood or a striped wood or a figured wood. It could be metal and it could be painted dark or light or color. You can see where I'm going. And all they're doing is presenting all of the options to the client. And the client's like, oh. Okay. And they look sort of like bewildered and befuddled. And they're like, so which one do you want to do? And the client's like, I have no idea. What do you think we should do? And like, well, it could be this and it could be that. And they didn't answer the question. Yeah. And the meeting ended and the client's like, well, I don't know. We're going to have to think about this for a while and get back to you. So, they leave. The architect who was leading the firm, hung out and watched our presentation and dialogue with the client. We talk about the interiors. We come in and we say, all right, so we're talking about the floor of this major skylit atrium space in India. The sun is bright. It's intense. It's going to flood into this space. You don't want to do a white floor. Number one, it's dusty as hell here. Mm-hmm. Number two, it's bright. And that floor is just going to be glaring and obnoxious, and you're going to see and you don't want to do a dark floor because it's going to absorb the sun and heat, and it's just going to suck it all in, and it's going to show every dust and every footprint and every piece of dirt and fleck of anything on it. So we think you should go somewhere in the middle. It should be stone because it has to be durable, or an artificial stone. Doesn't that make sense? And the client says, well, yeah, agreed. We're like, okay, so we're in agreement around a medium gray stone-ish floor. Cool. Here are 3 or 4 examples. We like this one, and here's why. It has a texture to it, and it's going to hide some of the dust and dirt. It's going to wear really well. And when you see it in that space, it's probably going to look a lot lighter than it is because of the bright sun that's coming through. The client goes, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Cool. By the way, you don't have to make this decision today. So we're going to send you these samples. We're going to get them to your space in India. You should put them out in the sun and see how it interacts and make that final decision. We got a couple weeks or a couple of months to think about it. It's not going to hold up anything else. Cool. Decision made. And our presentation went like that for the rest. And then the architect comes back at the end of the meeting because we're in their office, and he says, I don't know how you guys do it. We can't get any decision out of them. And you guys come in and they make every decision. And I said, because we tell them what the decision is they should be making. We help them, not because it's our opinion, but because we listened and we observed and we paid attention to their problem. And we gave them solutions and made it really easy for them.
But people are paying, the clients do pay for our opinion in a sense, right? And we work a lot on that. It was hard for me as a designer early on to give my opinion in that. It's like I had my opinion. But then I was able to eventually do the same kind of thing. Well, this is personally why I like this, right? And it's not like this is what you should choose. This is what I like the best. It's this is why I like this is the best. Right. But all of these are valid. So now it kind of puts the decision, I've given my opinion, I've directed you in a certain way, but if you pick all these others, I'm cool with it, right? And we can work with it kind of thing. It's a hard thing to do in design. It really is. I get the guy that gives all the options and says, okay, now pick one. And then what the hell? Why can't we do this?
And the other side of the coin, though, we worked with Frank Gehry on a project on the West Side Highway years ago. And, he is the Cape wearing architect in that sense, right? The star architect in that name. And their team would walk in and say, we should do this on the floor. And the client would be like, I really don't think that's a good idea. It won't wear well. They're like, well, I mean, okay, you're making a bad decision. Well, but we'll think about some other options. And they would come back to the table with options that no one would ever pick.
Right.
In like even worse, sillier options, and say, well, here's some other ones. They're like, well, these make even less sense. And it was their way of sort of jamming in the viewpoint of, and by the way, fantastic team to work with. Excellent project. The outcome was great. Client never did like the floor.
That's funny.
There's a fine line and there's a space in between that is leading without shoving your opinion on them. And unless we are that star architect who is an artist first and an architect second, your opinion matters, but you're also, it shouldn't just be because that's what you think is the right thing to do.
Correct.
We're not named artists.
Right.
We're not Picassos.
I'll come back to that though with you. If you had to pick one thing, what annoys you about your fellow architects?
This is a tough question because you could. I could write a book about the issues in this profession in general and the industry. And I think it's a double sort of. I say it's a double-edged coin or double-sided coin. I think the problem is that architects have shed and walked away from responsibility, and a lot of that is risk aversion or avoidance rather than risk management and mitigation and addressing those risks. So we've sort of walked away from schedule and cost and said, well, we'll show you the stuff, someone else is going to have to price it. We're afraid to answer the questions or take responsibility to work within a bucket. And why is that? There's a lot of reasons it's come that way, but as a result, our scope has gotten smaller, our fees have gotten smaller, the tension on the industry has gotten smaller. And, when we started Origin, we sort of set out to be contrarians in that sense and to really lean in. And leaning into us has meant a lot of different things. It means we don't say no very often to our clients. We say yes and we take things on. Like they're like, well, really, you guys are good at project management. You should manage it. Okay, if that's what you'd like, we will do that for you. We'll find the right person to help you with that, and you'll have our leadership expertise at it, and we'll take on those pieces and parts of the project that in the past might have been shirked or avoided. When they say, how much will this cost? We give them a budget estimate range, and we say, this is where we think it should be. Now, obviously, labor tensions and market pricing may evolve and change that, but this is where we think it should be, and time will tell as you price it out, but it's not a non-answer.
Okay.
And then one of the interesting things that's come out of that is we've started actually helping our clients with procurement. And, we've all gone through projects where you're making a compromise at the last minute because something didn't get ordered.
Yep.
It was on the drawings from the very beginning and someone made a mistake and it just didn't get ordered and there's no visibility into what's happening. And all of a sudden, the architect and the client are compromising something and finding a new solution at the last minute that may or may not work the way it was intended to, but it certainly puts more time and cost pressure on the design firm, stress on the client. And so what we started doing for a lot of our clients is procuring the things that often get dropped and helping them get it to the table. And we know what the status of things is because we're in the meetings, we're paying attention. So it's easier for us to manage and mitigate that process. And it also saves the clients a ton of money.
Do you worry in that, because this is something that's come up, right? I've had other guests on there that talk about kind of taking back the profession, right? Some are more on the design build side, right? They want to actually do the construction side. Some same as you, they're interested in the project management. They're interested in procurement. They're interested in really getting and hiring the contractor themselves, stuff like that. Do you worry that that's going to limit, the project managers that are going to help you get onto certain jobs, or that the furniture dealers are going to be pissed off that you're, procuring the furniture or whatever, right? Or the procurement agent, if you're doing a restaurant space, is going to be annoyed that you're getting all the parts and pieces to it.
Yes, that could certainly happen. Right now, to date, that's not how we're getting our clients and our work anyhow.
Right.
So it's a fine line to play. We're not trying to take that business over, but it really is something that we will provide for certain clients. Like if we're doing a coffee shop chain where we're rolling out, in the course of a 3-year period, 30 coffee shops, and we're not reinventing the wheel on all of them. They all have the same counter. They all have the same light fixtures. Why not just help them manage the process so that things are happening fast? And the reason it wouldn't be the same contractor is just if they're in geographically different regions and areas. Right. So that part we don't want to touch. Labor isn't what we ever want to be managing, but managing the stuff, the product, the pieces, the elements that are going into a project is certainly something we can take on to the benefit of the project.
Yeah. If you had the power to change one thing about the way the profession operates, whether it's how we charge, how we work, how we train new architects, what would be your passion on that side?
Well, only one. I think my answer is probably that I think every architect should have to be on the owner side for part of their career. As part of the sort of training to be an architect, you should be forced to understand the finances behind a project. Yeah. It really changes everything when you realize that the clients may have a different driver for something, or what matters to them, and how do you really shape into it. It certainly changed the way I think about things. There are as a purist designer who cared about the quality of everything, I have, after being on the client side, eased up on a lot of that and realizing this job has to be done in record time, because time matters more than anything else, because of their TI allowance, because of their opening date and hitting the peak time of year for their business, whatever the drivers were. Finding unique solutions that help them achieve those drivers was super important. And I think we all become better designers if we've had exposure to the client's why.
Interesting.
And you come back to there's all these great books like Start With Why. Mm-hmm. Well, if we don't understand the why, how are we really good at doing the what? Yeah.
So I want to come back to the black cape thing, because I had it written down as a question, because I think of you as sort of in the workplace, right, as a black cape workplace architect, right? And what are your thoughts on black cape architects in general? And don't you think you're just as talented?
Do I think I'm just as talented? No. Okay. I will be the first one to tell you that, and this may be a newsflash, apparently, to the perceptions of the world. I am a better editor than a writer. And so I think of myself as the architectural equivalent of a good editor, helping you get that book figured out. I am not the talent who's putting the ideas on paper, never have been. The perception being that way may be because I talk about it more in the world. But the reality is I work with great, talented young architects and help them figure out how to get the best stuff accomplished. And it is a team effort, and it is a group project. And that's not what you get at the sort of black cape side of things, where someone has a sketch or an idea or a model, and then that is the direction that everyone's trying to figure out how to execute. Yeah. This is me bringing the best out of people for the client and filtering and editing. And it's I think, very different. And so as talented, maybe differently talented.
Interesting.
Maybe a unique way of looking at it.
It's a great way of putting it. It's a really great way of putting it. Yeah, I can see that. I can definitely see that. I would almost consider myself that as well. The big concepts, there are people that are far more talented, sure, right, than me at that, at our firm. But I can also say, well, you might want to go a little bit more in this direction. I don't see the client going for it. And I'm not sure that's really as great as you think it is, kind of thing.
Yeah, and sometimes my editorial feedback to our teams is this first presentation is your chance to go big.
Mm-hmm.
It's your chance to show all of the what could be to the client, because it's going to get sort of changed and squeezed and nudged. And if you start in the middle or at the low, you'll never get to the high. But if you start high, all they can do is bring you down to the medium.
Yeah.
You probably won't ever get all the way to the low. And your outcome is going to be better if you start with a big, audacious idea.
Yeah.
And so I do encourage teams to start audacious and bring it back into, I hate to say reality, but bring it back into something that might be more in line with all of the needs and goals.
Yeah.
Because the audaciousness will never completely disappear from the idea in that sense. But it's hard to get it back in later.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
So our profession is notorious, for being overworked and underpaid. Do you think we bring that on ourselves, or
Yes.
what are some thoughts around that?
I go back, many, many years ago, in the middle of one of the biggest projects I ever worked on, which was the Bloomberg headquarters project in New York. And this was, we were working on it from 2000 to 2004. Mm-hmm. And it was not a big team. Our core team was probably 5 to 7 people on what ended up being 750,000 square foot new build in a new building that had everything in it under the sun, from training rooms to broadcast studios, radio studios, a really cutting edge workplace that still holds its own 20 years later.
I think it's an iconic workplace. It really is.
The project was so complicated and so big that we were going to have a deadline every week of some sort for 5 years or something like that. When we looked at the schedule of issuances and the phasing and the slicing and dicing, we were issuing a set of drawings every week, whether it was a revision to a previous phase set or a new set or an issue for bid or an issue for permit. It was daunting. And our project manager at the time, I was definitely being difficult. The project manager at the time comes back to the office and she says, "Good news. I've convinced the client to move our deadlines from Fridays to Mondays so we can work through the weekend and have 2 more days to get stuff done." And I was like, "You're out of your mind. Like, this small team is going to be on this thing for 5 years.
Working every week."
And she's like, "Well, what would you do instead? Keep it on Friday?" And I said, "No. I would move our deadlines to Thursday. Because then we finished the big push. By the way, it's Thursday night. This was back in the days when everything was printed and the drawings were coming in. It was like an elephant leg of drawings, and you have to manually collate all the engineers and consultants' drawings in with the architects, roll back up the elephant leg and wait for the messenger to come and send it to the print shop. Mm-hmm. Like, that's 2 or 3 hours worth of work. And of course, some consultant wasn't going to deliver their work until 6 or 7 p.m. So you're sitting around waiting for it. You weren't leaving until 8 o'clock minimum. Mm-hmm. On whatever day your deadline was. So like Friday night, my young team, they had things they wanted to do on a Friday night, not sit in the office waiting for the elephant leg to get rolled up. So Thursday night meant that we could, be there late that night, leave, have a beer, go home, be with your family, come back into the office the next morning, get into the next week's work.
Exactly.
By the time you leave Friday night, you figured out what you're getting into the next week. You leave. Nobody on the team worked weekends for that 5-year duration.
Yeah.
We made sure that the team, and with a couple of rare exceptions, we had a lot of late nights, but we did not work those weekends because we needed it or we would all have been burned out.
Yeah.
Come back in on Monday morning. You're at the desk working. You're being productive right out of the gate because you've had that Friday to work on things, and you push hard to that Thursday. And the team, and knowing the dynamics of us, we knew that we just couldn't endure 5 years of super late deadlines. And so it was a different way of thinking about it from the point of view of the person who was going to be there doing the work and the team that had the heavy lifting to do, and making sure that their viewpoint made it to the table and not just the sort of preconceived notions about like, let's have extra time. And I still to this day try to instill on our staff, like, we do this so that we can have a life.
Yeah.
If this is not our life, we're all super passionate about it and we give it a lot and everything that we can. But we need to leave and go be with our families and make sure that that can happen.
And it does make you more productive to take a break. You can't do this weekend after weekend after weekend. And we I hate when we do that on our end too. I mean, it's not fair.
It happens. Late nights and weekends happen, but it should be an exception, not a rule.
I agree.
And if you know that you've got a constraint, maybe your team can work more efficiently or more effectively. Maybe decisions are made more logically or linearly. Mm-hmm. And I always just say that usually if you look at an office and there's a team that's there working long hours over and over again, it's a breakdown in leadership, not a breakdown in the team's work. Mm-hmm. And inevitably it means that someone who's in a leadership role, who's weighing in on a project, isn't looking at it till the last minute and then spinning that team out in revisions. And we try our best to avoid that last minute feedback loop that causes the team to spin out, because 9 times out of 10,
correct.
That's why we're working ourselves to death.
Yes. Yep.
I mean, granted, we're still going to have unrealistic deadlines and push clients who are pushing us really hard to deliver things faster than we feel comfortable with.
Yep.
That stuff will never go away, but I'd say the majority of that overworked mentality and reputation, self-inflicted.
Yeah, I like it. So tell us a little bit about your origin story. Where did you grow up? What was your childhood like? Where'd you go to college?
I came from California originally, and I grew up in Northern California. We moved a lot. And when I was relatively young in grade school, late grade school, early middle school, I don't even remember how old I was exactly. We moved to Ohio. My dad took a new job in Ohio. The thought was we'd be there for 3 years. I didn't like anything about Ohio. Frankly, to me, it was like California was so much more interesting. There was snow. What? Like, snow was for something that you go into the mountains to see and go skiing or fishing or something. Like, it wasn't what I wanted to be doing with my life. And then I stayed in Ohio, and I stayed there until I graduated college. I went to the University of Cincinnati and left Ohio. And when I graduated, I remember saying, well, I'm going to a coast. I don't know if it's going to be the right coast or the left coast. It's kind of going to be wherever I get a job first. And fortunately, my last internship was at studios. So I picked up the phone after my father gave me a hard time for not having a job yet, about a week and a half after graduation. He's like, why don't you have a job yet? I'm like, oh, geez, fine, get off my back. Picked up the phone, called friends at studios, and I said, you guys need anybody? And they said, when can you be here?
Nice.
I said, I'll be there in 2 weeks. My dad said, did you find a job yet? I said, yes, I did. So I'll leave in 2 weeks.
Nice. So talk a little bit about the University of Cincinnati architecture program, because it's unique in the industry and kind of how it works.
Yeah, best decision I probably made in my career was going to the University of Cincinnati. And it's not that the education was anything better than what you might get at other architecture schools. I think the really unique driver of that education was that they required us to have 2 years effectively of internships under our belt to graduate.
Right.
Stretch the program out. We're 6 years into college as seniors instead of everyone we knew that we started school with in other professions and degrees left 2 years ago. And we're sitting there turning gray and getting bald already in college and feeling like, what are we doing? But we left school with a degree and 2 years of experience under our belt, knowing how to work the systems of the actual profession, knowing what an office needed, knowing how to be productive day one. And as a result, most people found a job right away.
Yeah.
And when you start to look at the trajectory of people that I graduated with, they're principals of firms. They've left and gone to other parallel industries and are excelling or doing quite well there. There are very few people who are sort of sitting in the middle of an office. I mean, we're not young chickens anymore, but there are very few people who haven't found paths to great success there.
I agree.
And part of it is you start off with a huge advantage over schools where people have never, used CAD or Revit for certain nowadays,
right,
or other of these tools that really are fundamental to doing the work. And they, wouldn't know how to produce a detailed elevation or lay out a sheet because all they've done is modeling and form making in school, and realizing that all the theory you learned probably isn't worth very much anymore.
Right.
It was, now mind you, I would also go back and say that the stuff I learned about architectural history and art history in college, I still use so much to this very day. Because when you start thinking about precedent making and delivering ideas, it's easy to communicate when you've got that deep history knowledge.
Yeah.
So that's probably the other balance in that education was, for some reason, I really glommed onto it and absorbed it and sort of memorized it almost as a Rolodex of ideas.
Yeah, there's very few schools that do that. I know there's one out of Canada, I think it's called Waterloo, because we've had some students from there that have gone on to be, great designers, great project managers. But same thing, they're working, they're getting that balance of theory and history and how to, talk about architecture. Yeah. And then they're also sitting and they're working and they understand like, oh, wait, this is an office. There's more people involved in a project and there's a client. There's someone at the other end.
Yeah,
and there's a budget.
I've certainly worked with lots of folks out of Waterloo. There's a school in California that does something similar, that has a similar outcome. San Luis Obispo is fantastic, the graduates that come out of that program. And there's a couple of, Rice does an internship thing and a couple of great schools in the middle of the country. Is it Kansas or Iowa? There are some phenomenal schools that do it. Cincinnati just did it earlier and did it bigger. And as a result, the network of employers that they have at your hand means that you get these interesting experiences. I mean, as a student, I lived in Nashville, I lived in Amsterdam, I lived in Chicago, I lived in New York City, and did work in all of those different places as a student. And it also helped me realize where I wanted to be. Right. Which, I mean, Amsterdam was interesting, but I really didn't enjoy the working progress there. But it was an interesting city to spend time in as a student, and as was Nashville. And I was like, at first I was like, oh, I have to go to Nashville. I don't want to go to Nashville. And then I was like, this city is charming. Yeah, it's a really interesting place to be. And now it's one of the hottest cities in the U.S. For sure, it's on fire. So now you started as an intern at Studios and you ultimately work your way up to managing principal, and Studios grew significantly during that period, I would assume, kind of just knowing a little bit about your career. How did that happen? And what did you learn about, going from intern to managing principal and from a leadership point of view? How does that all pan out? Well, I learned that I had great mentors and leaders who challenged me and pushed me and drove me crazy sometimes, but taught me a lot. I worked with some phenomenal people there who I'm still friends with and still talk to regularly. But yeah, we went from 5 in 1997 in the New York office to 75 when I left. And wow. I'm assuming they're bigger now. It was a heck of a growth. How did I end up in the position I was in? Part of it is being in the right place at the right time. Honestly, I don't want to dismiss that. Part of it is delivering great projects and connecting with clients in a meaningful way. And a big piece of it is my willingness and ability to really lean into mentorship and teaching staff and making, helping develop a team that could stand on their own, and has gone on to great things since then. Yeah. Yeah. I find this problem all the time when I start a new organization or move on to something new and I'm trying to recruit. I go back to the people I've worked with and I'm like, I can't afford any of them anymore. Like, they've all gone on to bigger and better things and have had these phenomenal successes. And I take great pride in that and great frustration because I want to hire these people. They're great, but I've got to go start and find a new team and do this over again, because those people have all gone and found their own successes. And that was true of the people I worked with at Studios. As I moved on beyond that, it's certainly true of the folks that we were working with at Convene. And I go through the Rolodex and try to bring people in organically. It's probably not going to be any of the people I've worked with before, although they'd all love to. They've got bigger things, and their expectations are going to be much higher than I could probably give them. So switching gears to Convene, and that's obviously where we worked together. What got you to the client side? And you talked a little bit about being on the client side and the value of that. What was that experience like? I was working with Convene. They were a client of mine. Mm-hmm. Working for a small firm in New York with Convene as a client. And they were not going to work with this firm anymore, but they loved the team that was working with them. And I was antsy and realizing that this was not where I belonged, and it was not a place I needed to stay at. So I was determined to leave. And so I took a vacation moment, reset, rethought, and came back, and I met with our client and I said, I have an idea. And she's like, I have an idea too. And I said, I'm going to start a new firm, and I think you guys should come with us and be our client. And she said, oh. And I said, well, what's your idea? She's like, I think you should come and work for Convene. And I said, oh, I don't think I want to do that. And she's like, oh, well, I guess we can do it your way. And then I met with Ryan, and we sort of hashed out this idea that he would help support this creation of a new firm. They would be a client, and we would build this team, and we built it quickly. I mean, I went from 0 to 10 people in 6 months, 7 months, and we had more work than we could keep up with. We were really unable to take on other clients because we couldn't keep up with the Convene work we had.
Yeah.
They were growing so rapidly. We were trying to grow to keep up with them. And at some point, we realized Convene was going to start growing on the West Coast and in other geographic regions that we weren't in, and that realistically, we probably couldn't support them and could grow fast enough to keep up with it. So we agreed that we would manage those projects, but we would hire outside firms.
Right.
So we hired HOK and Gensler to run a couple of projects with us out on the West Coast. Our team was managing it. We started doing that even in New York and on the East Coast. And we realized this is kind of weird. Like, we're a different firm. We sort of share space with Convene. We sit in a Convene. We're semi-supported by them. They're our client. We're working with these other firms. We're like, this is just weird. And I talked with Ryan about it one day, and he said, well, why don't we just acquire you guys and bring you in-house fully and pivot what your team is doing? So he acquired the organization. We came in-house and grew from there, and grew it as a design leadership and management team, helping execute the standard process that Convene did, develop what that should be, what a Convene should look like, and what it was all about, and then figure out a way to effectively communicate that to our design firm partners, all while challenging them to do these things faster than they've ever delivered a project, cheaper than they've ever delivered a project, and with the quality level that was just as good, like keeping all 3 legs on the 3-legged stool, despite what everyone says. And it was a daunting undertaking. We grew that team to 45 people in a few years.
Wow.
And we were managing, $200 million of new build outs a year, every one of which at that point was being done by a partner firm.
Okay.
And we were helping sort of define the process by saying, okay, we've developed all of these. We didn't call them standards. We called them, I'm drawing an entire blank on it right now, but we'd created a different version of it where we had a framework that we were giving folks, where we said, what we care about is the way a pantry, for instance, flows and functions. I don't care what finish it is. That should be local. That should be based on the design ethos of the space, the project, the city, the region, whatever it was, the building. Like, the building should be responsive to the interior and vice versa. So we give our partners a lot of leeway on the messaging of the space. But we also put that through a framework. And we said, we want you to be able to communicate this in a pithy way where we could talk to our own sales teams and internal teams and clients who are going to be using the spaces and tell them a narrative story about the design. Mm-hmm. So we held them to a high bar of narrative storytelling while working within a standards or typology framework, but giving them a lot of freedom to do everything in between on the shortest schedule they could possibly ever imagine. And a lot of firms embraced that and ran with it, and they were fantastic to work with. We did have firms, however, who would take everything we gave them, throw it out the window and start from scratch again. And I'm like, why did you redraw this pantry flow? This is not how we do it. Like we gave you what every light switch was, where every outlet was, how the ceiling should work, what the acoustics should be, what the partition type should be, how doors should function. We gave you all of that. Why would you start over? And they're like, I didn't know you wanted us to use that. I'm like, we gave you hundreds of pages of documents that you all you've done is waste your fee. You still have to deliver it on time, and all those things have to be intact. And they would they would have done that classic thing where they went down a path and then started over again.
Yep, and there goes all their fee.
And there goes all their fee.
Well, so what are your thoughts in general about co-working? Because I feel like it's kind of everywhere, right? Even Lifetime, we do Lifetime Fitnesses. Lifetime has a co-working brand, right? Like
they're actually quite good spaces. I've been in a couple of them.
Yeah. So, but I don't know. Is there enough to support them? It seems like a good idea, especially post-COVID, although now we're seeing a change in, more people back in the office. Just what are your thoughts in general on it?
Well, other than the fact that I hate the term co-working, shared flexible office, I think, has a huge future. It is a tough business.
Seems to be, because I don't think they perform financially.
The idea that you're going to lease a space from a landlord and resell that space to a client at a higher rate, taking on all the risk of the shorter duration and the flexibility that goes with it. Yeah, not a very appealing business on the paper. In reality, I think that's starting to shake out, that it's not a very appealing business. I think the reality is there's a future there. And I think the most successful co-working spaces are going to be property owner owned and run. And they may end up being more like a hotel where there's a flag on it. So most hotels aren't owned by Marriott. They're flagged by Marriott and owned by a property developer.
Yep.
So that it's being managed by a team to a standard that's being set by a Marriott. And I think that the faster, and some of them have done a pretty good job of this pivot, but the faster that these co-working organizations pivot to a sales network model and a standards model, I think that business will have huge success, and it'll have to scale. But it can scale faster because there's less capital involved, because it's the property owner's space. And then you're not taking a space, signing a lease and then marking it up. It's really the landlord's got this space, the property owner's got the space anyway. What makes sense?
Yeah.
And I'm really intrigued by the Industrious project that was announced at Lever House. It's exactly the model I've been preaching for years, which says do a major HQ and then take the expansion space that they all want and build it out as flexible space that could be used by all sorts of people in the short term, including that HQ as they grow.
Yep.
So it gives them a lot more flexibility about shrinkage or expansion and when it happens. You don't have to wait for your 3-year time frame to get the next ROFO space, but rather organically change and grow.
Yeah.
And you're never sort of up against a wall.
Let's talk about your current firm, Origin. And you have a co-founder as well, right?
Yes.
Kevin Denlinger, right?
Yep.
So how did you guys get together, and when did you found the firm, and what are you guys working on now?
Well, Kevin and I started working together in 2016. I think I recruited him out of ZGF to come and work for an organization I was at where Convene was our client. And so then when we started the new organization, I pulled a few of the key people from that place into Assemble, which was acquired by Convene. And so then he went on to be a key member of the team at Convene and stayed after I left to continue the journey through the pandemic. God bless them all. What a unfortunate set of events and timing for that organization and everyone involved in it. So in 2021, we started the conversation around next steps and putting the team back together again and shaping out how it would work. And we thought there's this really great opportunity to do work at the intersection of hospitality and workplace. And so we were like, really, honestly, anything that's in those sort of circles, we're interested in. Mm-hmm. And so we set out to do that, to service our clients, bringing the knowledge about operating hospitality-driven spaces from Convene on the client side, together with our background in the design world, and do something really, we thought, really unique.
Yeah, very.
The sort of interesting outcome of that is that we've worked on almost zero workplace since
really?
then, and all of our work is hospitality. The workplace work we are doing is amenity space. It's meeting and event spaces, it's tenant lounges, it's cafes and coffee shops that are part of the landlord or building ecosystem, property owner ecosystem, not tenant space. We have not one single tenant client. So as somebody who's spent their entire career building spaces for the occupier, I'm now working on the other side of the fence almost entirely and doing spaces that are much more dynamic, much more complicated. It's, when you think about a workplace, there's pantries and there's meeting spaces
really
and event spaces. And then there's a lot of open space.
Right.
And it's gotten much more interesting and much more dynamic. But what we're doing is all of the hard parts and none of the floors of desks right now. And it's been an interesting endeavor.
Yeah.
We've also found that almost none of our work is in New York City.
Interesting.
And that we're finding ourselves working in places like Little Rock and Minneapolis and, some work on the West Coast, some work in Chicago, a ton of work in DC. I think I've got a person in DC probably every other week.
Wow.
All week, because we've got, I think right now, 6 or 7 projects underway in DC.
Wow.
A lot of coffee shops, a lot of restaurants, full service restaurants, casual restaurants, bars, event spaces, a lot of really fabulous, fun projects.
Yeah.
No workspace. Like nobody from, Steelcase and Herman Miller's heard much from us for years, and they're wondering what's going on. I expect it'll change. I think what we're seeing over the next year is a refocusing on New York City and some success in getting some really epic projects here in our home base, which will be a nice relief to travel less, I think, for the entire team, certainly for myself.
And we touched on it a little bit earlier, but I think what's fascinating about your firm is this idea that you're sort of the full service, right? So you're doing strategy, you're doing obviously the design side. But I saw on your website, it's also, lighting design, furniture design, food service, AV, art. So you're involved in as many aspects of it as you can be in.
Absolutely. We just finished a project in Minneapolis where the client really wanted an aggressive art and accessories program. They wanted the space to be just rich with spaces. And what we ended up doing for them was all of the ground floor food hall spaces, a couple of restaurants like General Store, lobbies, and then 3 floors of co-working, a flexible office space, and a half a floor of meeting and event space with a huge terrace, all of which we did the art and accessories for too. And that was a procurement exercise. And it was, an exercise in acquiring, $750,000 worth of stuff that sits in the space. And it was very themed. It was very mid-century. It was, one of the oldest iconic mid-century buildings in downtown Minneapolis that's getting new life and being brought back to life. And the client really wanted to celebrate that heritage and not brush it under the rug. So you're not going to any of the usual places to source everything. It's a lot of Etsy searching. Wow. And it's a different way of thinking about it and going about doing it. And there really is no way to do that as a design, here's a spec, go buy it process.
Go figure it out somebody
else. It really
else.
had to be a procure, install scenario. So it was a different take. It was fun. I think when my team was done with that, when they were like, we're exhausted, we've been in Minneapolis every other week for a month and a half installing.
Yeah. So you're taking on the install.
Well, a lot of the objects, it's just easier to place them with the designer who's paying attention to it. The art we would have people install. We did some really clever window box displays in some of the retail spaces on the Skyway level. Cool. Where I had a person who was literally planting little pieces of wheat in a foam base for weeks on end. And I'm like, well, that's a first for everything. But we really do want to bring anything our clients need to the table and help service them.
Very cool. So as we wrap up, is there anything we haven't covered that you'd like to tell the listeners?
I'd say, listen, we can be critical of the architecture industry, and there's lots to challenge. It hasn't progressed very much. This is an industry, construction in general is an industry that's probably, I believe it's the only one in the Department of Labor's classifications that's gone backwards in productivity over the last 40 years. There's been lots of industries that haven't had great productivity, great gains, but construction's actually gone backwards. Yeah. It's time to change. It's time to think about things a little differently. And we can do that and embrace great design at the same time and really create spaces that people want to be in that they are that's memorable to them, that makes someone want to come home from the office or the restaurant or the coffee shop and be like, you got to check this place out.
Right.
And for us, that's the bar that we try to set, is have we made the process smoother and faster and easier? But more importantly, has someone left the space talking about it? Has someone left the space going, oh, I saw the coolest thing today? Whatever that might be, like that's our sort of our North Star.
I love it.
This.
I love it. Brian, thank you so much for being my guest on the Anti-Architect podcast. You're a huge part of the industry, and it's been great to know you all these years and finally get to work with you at some point. And I'm excited to see kind of how you continue to transform the industry, because I know you will. You're the perfect anti-architect guest.
Thank you.
So to learn more about Brian Tolman and his firm, you can visit theoriginus.com, and of course find him on LinkedIn and all that good stuff. So thank you again.
Thank you so much. This was fun.
Awesome.
27 years later.
That's right.